Okay, so in this lecture, I'm going to do a basic configuration of the three routers, R1, R2, and R3. And I'm going to start with R1. I want you to first take a look at this topology, network topology. And let's just focus on R1. And you know that R1 has two interfaces, right? The Ethernet interface and then serial interface, the serial port and Ethernet port. So if you look at the Ethernet port, right? And the IP address of this Ethernet port is 172.16.3.1, right? And the /24. And if you look at the serial port, the IP address is 172.16.2.2.1, right? Yep, 2.1 and /24. Okay, so let's just focus on R1. Okay. And let's see. Okay. And this is like basic configuration for the R1. Okay, so I'll first we'll get into the global configuration mode, right? And then show IP interface brief to see all the interfaces of router 1 R1. And as you can see, there are 4 interfaces, and all of them is currently are all down, right? The gigabyte Ethernet 0001 and serial port 01, right? Okay. And oops. Okay. And the next is I'm going to change the name of this router. So first I need to go to the configuration mode, right? And then host name is the command. And then I'm going to change this router name to R1, right? And at this point, you know that there's a change, right? R1, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the password for the console port, okay? So these 4 lines, I'm going to type these 4 lines to set up the password for the console port. The console port is used to, to execute the Cisco commands, like for example, using your laptop. So you connect your laptop to console port of the router, right? And then you can type the command, right, through the console port. And so you can think this is like a console port, right? Okay. So first, in the configuration mode, I have to get into the console line mode. So by typing line console 0, right? 0 means basically the first port. It always starting with the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So console 0 means the very first console port, but usually the router probably have one console port, right? Okay, so you see the change, right? Now my mode is in the config line mode, right? That's where I am right now. So if you look at the previous, lectures, my lecture, right? Hold on. Okay. Hold on, it takes time. Okay. So if you look at my previous lecture, I talk about this. The yellow is a global configuration mode, right? Within the yellow, I have config-if, right? That's for the interface, right? And then you have a config router, that's for routing protocol, right? And within this global configuration, the third one is what? Config-line, right? So right now I'm at this mode, config line, to change or set up the password for the console port and like remote connections like FreeTY, right? So either console port or like FreeTY and many more, right? So as you can see, right now I'm in the config line mode, right? Like FreeTY and like within the configuration mode, global configuration mode. So if you want to get out of this config line mode, right, you have to simply type what? Exit, right? you can type exit to get out of this mode and get back to this global configuration mode. And if you type end, then you will be in the, you can bypass, right? Bypass config T, and then you can directly go to the privileged exe mode, right? Use a privileged exe mode. Okay. Having said that, let's look at the R1, right? In R1, right now I'm in the config line mode, so logging synchronous, and then tab, right? You don't have to really type everything, just tab, and then password, right? Tab, and then I'll just say hi. I know that hi is not a really secure password, but this is a lab, so I just want to really choose a simple password, say hi, and then log in. I'm done, right? Now I set up the password for my console port, and now the new password is hi. And then I'll exit. Now I'm back to the config mode. By the way, I'm not going to do this. This is for this set up the password for the remote connection, VTY. 0 to 4 means, I think, 4 or 5 lines, starting from the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're setting up the multiple remote connections, right? You can set up the password for the multiple remote connection, and the new password is Cisco, but I'm going to skip this part because it's not really relevant to our lab, static routing. Okay. So for example, let's say and, right? So I'm back to the the user mode, right? Okay. Oops. So I'll probably need to go back to configuration mode. Oops. Oops. Okay. Oops. Okay, so I'll go back to configuration mode, and when you type no IP domain lookup, by the way, you type this in the configuration mode, right? Global configuration mode. When you type no IP domain lookup, right? And actually, this is very important command. It's very helpful because this no IP domain lookup command is really helpful. So for example, when you type like any single word entered on the Cisco iOS device that is not recognized as a valid command. For example, let's say you misspell, right? Mistyped. Like for example, in this case, WRITT, something is not really a valid Cisco iOS command, right? In that case, and that Cisco iOS will treat this as a host name to which you want to telnet, right? And then the router will try to translate that word to an IP address in a progress that can last about a minute. Actually, this is like, so for example, in this case, when you type something like mistype some Cisco command, whatever, right? And if it is not a valid, they're trying to translate this, right? And then translate to an IP address. So they need to, so for that they need to contact the, they try to contact the domain name server, right? So unknown command or computer name unable to find computer address. So this process, they said take a minute, but to me it's probably like, it's more than a minute. So this is really like bothersome, okay? So when you, however, so that's why there is a rescue. Right? So when you type no IP domain lookup, even though you type this like something that is not recognized by Cisco, it's something that is not a valid Cisco iOS command, they'll simply type unknown command or a computer name and unable to find computer address immediately. Okay? You get this message immediately, but without this command, you have to wait like more than a minute. This is really like, it's bothers me, so I always type no IP domain lookup command. Okay, so please use this command, no IP domain lookup. Okay, So I already did, right? I already did the, by the way, this is from this website. Okay, now, so I type no domain lookup command, right? So next step is I'm going to configure the each interface, right? And then I'm going to assign the IP address for each interface. So in the configuration mode, right now I will get into this interface mode, type int. So we know that we have what? We have the gigabyte Ethernet, right? So instead of typing everything, also you can just type G and 00. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. IP address, right? Oops, no. First get into interface. So int means interface, the gigabyte 0/0, right? Now I'm in the config interface mode, right? So this is something I covered. So right now we are in the config interface mode, right? So right now we are the config interface mode. Okay. And then let's see, what is the next step? Okay, so now it's time to assign the IP address to that interface by typing IP address as, this is the keyword, and then IP address is 172.16.3.1 255.255.255.0, right? Since the IP address is in topology, you know, I get this IP address, right? 172.16.1, right? And then /24 is the subnet mask, right? Okay, so that's for R1. Oh, and then after you type this, you must, this is like must, you have to activate the interface by typing no shutdown. So this is like, this command will activate your interface, right? Now the state, you can see that the status is up, right? And then I'm going to exit, right? Go back to the global configuration mode. And then now it's time to configure the serial port by typing interface serial 000, right? 000. And if you look at the diagram, the configuration, this topology, you know that what? This is what? 000, right? It's called DCE. You see that, right? DCE 000, right? So basically, I'm just following the topology diagram. Okay. And let's see. Okay. And then interface. And then the next is assign the IP address 172.16.2.1 and subnet mask, right? And another thing is, if you look at the diagram, not only you can see the IP address .1, right? And you know that this is a DCE. So I'm going to set the clock rate for this interface, right? You know, for the serial port, you have to set up the clock rate. For example, right? For example, let's say you have two routers, right? You have two routers, and if two routers are connected by the serial line, you have to set the clock rate. By the way, this is for the serial line, not the Ethernet. And the good thing is, you can just set up the clock rate for only one end. You don't have to set up the clock rate for both ends, just one end. Either this or this, okay? So for me, for this lab, I'm going to set up the clock rate for this port. So when I configure R2, I don't have to really set the clock rate for this serial port, right? So I'm going to set the clock rate for R1, right, for this serial port. Okay. And let's see. Okay, the clock rate. I'm going to set the clock rate as what? 64000, right? Okay, so clock rate Okay, and then I think this clock rate 64000. There's many other options, but I'll just choose this rate. There's other rates you can you can use, but for this lab I'm gonna use 6400, right? Then after I set up the clock rate, right? Okay, so hold on, clock. I think clock rate. I think the question mark. Okay, so when you put the question mark, right, you can see all the available clock rate you can use. But for me, I use 64000, right, as clock rate. Okay, anyway, I set up the clock rate, right? I'm done, and then before I exit out of this config interface mode, I must activate this serial line, right? Serial port. So by typing what? No shutdown, right? Okay. But as you, okay, so I'm done, right? So let's exit and then exit one more time. Right now I'm in the privileged mode, right? Privileged exe mode. And then from this mode I can type show IP interface brief and show route and etc., right? Or I can use a ping. But let's say show IP interface brief. Okay? And this is very useful command to see the IP address of each interface. And at the same time, this is very useful tool for debugging, because sometimes you can assign the IP address, right? So this is really good time to check your IP address for each interface. So we know that I just assigned this IP address. Now its status is up, right? And as for the serial port 000, this is the IP address. Looks okay, but as you can see, it's still down. The reason that it's down is that in order for me to change the status, right? Change the status of this serial port from down to up, I have to configure the other end, right? If I configure the other end, then this will be activated. Okay, so I have to wait. I have to wait until I configure R2. So that's really kind of unique thing about the serial line or the serial port compared to the Ethernet port. Okay. Now the next thing is I can type show IP route, right? At this point, the C means directly connected network, right? So which is 172.16, right? It's variably subnetted, so VLSM, right? And basically two subnets. When you look at the topology, right? This guy and this guy are variably subnetted, right? From 172.16. Okay, and then C is directly connected. 172.16.3. Actually, this is directly connected network, right? But the reason that they're generally showing this 172.16.20, right, in this routing table is that serial port has not been activated. That's why. But once the serial port is activated, we'll probably see another network called 172.16.3.0 as a directly connected network. And L means local interface. So we know that this, if you look at the Ethernet, the gigabyte Ethernet 00, this is the IP address, right? So this is the IP address, right? Local interface. It's directly connected local interface. Okay. And so I'm done with the R1. Okay, is that I'm done? Let's see. Yeah, I think, okay. Oh, one more. So if I just want to see the current configuration, right? I'll type show run, right? And as you can see, if you type show run more, right? You can see all the commands that I've typed in. So interface, this is my clock rate, and this is my IP address, and this is also a useful debugging tool, right? Show run, meaning the show running configuration, current running configuration, show run. And then if you want to save, right? If you want to save this current configuration, right? The command that you have to is copy run. Run means current running configuration to your startup configuration. So when your router startup or reboot, right? Or then they will use this startup configuration, right? So that's why it's better for you to save your current configuration to the startup configuration, right? So this is okay. So this is something that you have to use at the end to save all your work. Okay. So in the next lecture, I'm going to talk about R2 basic configuration. Okay. Thank you.